In the northern land of Greece, in the kingdom of Macedon, the summer 356 BC brought forth a child destined to alter the course of history. He was born in Pella, the capital city, under circumstances that were said to be marked by signs and omens. His name was Alexander, son of King Philip II and Queen Olympias. Philip, the king, was a brilliant warrior and statesman, a man who had taken Macedon from obscurity and forged it into a formidable power among the Greek states. Olympias, Alexander's mother, came from the royal house of Epirus. Fierce, proud, and deeply religious, she filled the boy's imagination with tales of gods and heroes, whispering to him that his blood carried divine sparks. In fact, legend spread even during his lifetime that Zeus himself, king of the gods, was his true father. Whether myth or belief, these stories instilled in Alexander a conviction that he was destined for greatness. From the very beginning, his life was shadowed by omens. Ancient writers tell us that on the night of Alexander's birth, the great temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the largest temple in the Greek world, was consumed by fire. Priests and prophets declared a sign. The goddess could not protect her shrine, for she was away attending the birth of a child who would one day conquer the world. Even as a child, Alexander showed qualities that set him apart. He was curious, strong-willed, and bold, often restless among other children of the court. He listened with fascination to tales of Achilles, the legendary hero of Homer's Iliad. His mother encouraged this obsession, telling him that he was descended from Achilles through her bloodline. Alexander would later carry a copy of the Iliad on all his campaigns, treating it not as a story, but as a guide to life. While most princes of his age might have been content to live in luxury, Alexander was shaped by a father who demanded discipline and courage. King Philip did not allow softness in his household. He had risen to power through hardship and war, and he expected his son to be forged in the same fire. Macedon was a land of soldiers, and Alexander's early life was a training ground. Yet his mother, Olympias, gave him something equally important: ambition. She nurtured in him the belief that he was not like ordinary men. She often told him that his destiny was to surpass his father, to achieve greatness that would echo for eternity. These two influences, his father's realism and his mother's mysticism, shaped the boy into a figure both practical and dream-filled, both ruthless and visionary. Thus, from the very beginning, Alexander was not simply a prince. He was a child of prophecy, raised between the world of men and the world of gods. His life began in shadows of myth and fire, and already whispers moved through Macedon. This boy would be more than a king. He would be a conqueror. As Alexander grew, his restless energy and sharp mind demanded guidance greater than what the Macedonian court could provide. His father, King Philip II, knew that his son was destined for leadership, and if he were to rule not only Macedon but perhaps all of Greece, he would need the wisdom of philosophy, science, and culture. So Philip secured for his son one of the greatest teachers the world had ever known, Aristotle, the philosopher of Athens, student of Plato, and heir to the legacy of Greek thought. At the age of 13, Alexander and a small group of noble boys were placed under Aristotle's care. Their classroom was the sanctuary of Mysa, a peaceful retreat surrounded by gardens, groves, and temples. Here, far from the noise of politics and war, Alexander was immersed in the wonders of knowledge. Aristotle taught him philosophy, ethics, politics, mathematics, and natural science. He introduced him to literature and poetry, giving him a passion for Homer's Iliad. The Iliad in particular became Alexander's lifelong companion. To him, Achilles was not just a mythic hero, but a model for his own life. Inspired by Achilles' courage and glory, Alexander dreamed of making his own name immortal. He kept a copy of Homer's epic, annotated by Aristotle himself, under his pillow throughout his campaigns. But Aristotle's lessons went beyond books. He taught Alexander the value of reason, observation, and logic, urging him to see the world not only through ambition, but through understanding. He instilled in him a fascination with nature, medicine, and the diversity of peoples and cultures. It was Aristotle who shaped Alexander's belief that conquest was not only about victory in battle, but also about spreading knowledge and blending civilizations. Still, Alexander was not only a thinker. His spirit demanded action. Even during his studies, he trained in the arts of war, horsemanship, hunting, and strategy. One story stands above all from these years: the taming of Bucephalus, the great black stallion. Bucephalus was a wild horse no one could control. When Philip's men tried to ride him, the animal reared and threw them aside. The court declared him useless, but young Alexander watched carefully. He noticed that the horse was terrified of his own shadow. With calm confidence, Alexander turned Bucephalus toward the sun, so that the shadow fell behind him. Gently, he mounted, and the horse submitted. The crowd gasped, and Philip declared, "My son, you must find a kingdom great enough for your ambition. Macedon is too small for you." This moment was more than a demonstration of courage. It revealed Alexander's gift for insight, his ability to see what others missed, and his fearlessness in seizing opportunity. Bucephalus would become his loyal companion in war, carrying him into countless battles until the end. By the time he was 16, Alexander had absorbed both wisdom and discipline. He was already showing signs of leadership, entrusted with responsibilities while his father campaigned abroad. The lessons of Mysa stayed with him forever. The pursuit of knowledge, the dream of heroism, and the belief that destiny awaited him beyond the borders of Macedon. Alexander was no longer just a prince. He was becoming a figure of legend in the making, a student of the greatest philosopher of his age, and a young man preparing to step into a world far larger than his teachers could imagine. By the time Alexander reached his mid-teens, his transformation from boy to warrior had already begun. The years of study under Aristotle had sharpened his mind, but the blood of Macedon demanded more than philosophy. In the rugged lands of northern Greece, where every man was expected to fight, Alexander was trained daily in the arts of war. Swordsmanship, spear fighting, archery, and the harsh discipline of the Macedonian phalanx became second nature to him. Hunting in the wilds tested his endurance, and riding with Bucephalus gave him mastery over cavalry tactics. His father, King Philip II, had rebuilt the Macedonian army into one of the most formidable forces in the world. Philip was a master strategist, a veteran of countless campaigns, and he made sure his son learned not from theory alone, but from the dust and blood of the battlefield. At just 16 years old, when Philip marched to war against Byzantium, Alexander was left behind to act as regent, the king in his father's place. It was a test, and Alexander did not fail. When a Thracian tribe rebelled, threatening Macedon's borders, the young regent did not hesitate. He led the army personally, crushed the revolt, and founded a new city on the site of his victory. That city, named Alexandropolis, was the first to carry his name, a foreshadowing of many more to come. Only a year later, at 17, Alexander stood beside his father at the Battle of Chaeronea, 338 BC, one of the most decisive clashes in Greek history. Philip commanded the Macedonian army against an alliance of Greek city-states led by Athens and Thebes. The battle was fierce, and the fate of Greece hung in the balance. On the left wing, Alexander led the companion cavalry, the elite horsemen of Macedon. Charging with ferocity, he broke through the sacred band of Thebes, a unit famed for its bravery and skill. His courage and brilliance on the field helped secure a crushing victory for Macedon. This victory united Greece under Philip's rule, but it also revealed something important. Alexander was not just a boy following orders. He was a natural commander, bold and decisive, able to inspire men far older than himself. Soldiers began to see him not merely as their prince, but as a leader worthy of loyalty. Yet, despite these triumphs, Alexander's relationship with his father was strained. Philip, though proud of his son's talent, was wary of his ambition. Tensions grew as Philip prepared for a new marriage that threatened Alexander's position as heir. At a banquet, a drunken quarrel erupted between father and son. In his anger, Philip attempted to strike Alexander, but stumbled and fell. The young prince, furious and humiliated, is said to have shouted, "Here's the man who would cross from Europe into Asia, and yet he cannot cross from one couch to another." The rift between them was deep, though Philip later sought reconciliation. Still, Alexander's pride and ambition could not be ignored. He had already proven himself in war. He had already begun to dream of conquests greater than his father's. By his late teens, Alexander was not simply a student or prince. He was a warrior forged in battle, a commander whose name was already spoken with awe, and a young man whose destiny was pushing him towards something far greater than Macedon. In the year 336 BC, Fate struck swiftly and violently. King Philip II, the man who had united Greece under Macedonian power, was assassinated during a grand wedding celebration in Aegae. The details remain a mystery. Some blamed jealous rivals, others whispered of Persian involvement, and some even suspected Queen Olympias herself. But one thing was certain. Philip was dead, and the throne of Macedon now stood open. Alexander, only 20 years old, ascended as king. His youth made him a target for enemies. Many doubted his ability to rule, believing that without his father's iron hand, Macedon would crumble. The Greek city-states, long restless under Macedonian dominance, saw an opportunity to reclaim their freedom. Rivals within the Macedonian nobility also plotted to seize the throne. Alexander's first test was survival. He moved with ruthless speed. Those who opposed him within the court were executed. Conspirators were eliminated. Within days, Alexander secured his position as king, showing a decisiveness that silenced doubt. Yet outside Macedon, danger loomed. News of Philip's death ignited rebellions across Greece. Athens and Thebes stirred with defiance, believing the young king would falter. Thracian and Illyrian tribes on the borders prepared to break free. Alexander acted before hesitation could spread. In 335 BC, he marched north into Thrace, crushing resistance with ferocity that reminded all of his father's strength. He crossed the Danube, forcing tribes to submit, then turned west to smash the Illyrians. Within weeks, the northern frontier was secured. But while he was away, Thebes rose in open revolt, believing him dead. The response was swift and merciless. Alexander marched his army nearly 300 miles in just 2 weeks, appearing at the gates of Thebes before the city even realized he lived. Thebes had long been one of the proudest and most powerful Greek states, but Alexander would make them an example. His army stormed the walls, and after brutal fighting, Thebes was destroyed, its houses burned, its people slaughtered or sold into slavery, and only temples and the home of the poet Pindar were spared. The message was clear. Rebellion against Alexander meant annihilation. Athens, shaken, backed down. The rest of Greece submitted in silence. In less than a year, the 20-year-old king had secured his throne, subdued his rivals, and established absolute authority. Yet Alexander's ambition stretched far beyond Greece. His father had long planned a great campaign against Persia, the ancient empire that had once invaded Greece and still loomed as a mighty power. Now, Alexander inherited not only his father's throne, but also his dream. With Greece united and his authority unquestioned, he prepared to carry Macedonian arms across the sea. The boy who had once studied in Aristotle's garden, who had ridden Bucephalus as a youth, who had charged at Corinthia as a teenager, was now a king and conqueror. At only 20 years old, Alexander had already carved his name into history. But this was only the beginning. The world beyond Greece lay waiting, and Alexander was ready to claim it. In the spring of 334 BC, the young king of Macedon stood at the edge of the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Europe from Asia. Before him stretched the vast Persian Empire, an empire that spanned from the Aegean Sea to the mountains of India. For generations, Persia had been the greatest power in the world, feared and respected by all. Yet Alexander, only 22 years old, believed he was destined to bring it to its knees. Before crossing, he performed a symbolic act. Throwing a spear into Asian soil, he declared that he had come not as a trespasser, but as a rightful conqueror. With an army of some 40,000 soldiers, far smaller than Persia's legions, Alexander began the greatest campaign of his life. The first clash came at the Battle of the Granicus River. The Persian satraps, confident in their cavalry, tried to block his passage. Alexander, fearless, led his companion cavalry in a direct charge across the river's currents, spears and arrows raining down upon him. He was struck on the helmet, nearly killed, but fought his way through and inspired his men to overwhelm the enemy. The victory opened the gates of Asia Minor. One city after another surrendered, but Persia would not fall so easily. In 333 BC, King Darius III himself marched to stop Alexander with a force said to number over 100,000 men. The armies met at Issus, on the narrow coastal plain of Cilicia. There, Alexander's smaller army held the advantage. leading his cavalry. He cut straight toward Darius himself. The sight of a young king thundering toward him broke Darius' nerve. He abandoned his chariot and fled the battlefield. The Persians were crushed, and Darius' own family fell into Alexander's hands. Yet Alexander treated them not with cruelty, but with honor. He assured Darius' wife, daughters, and mother that they would be safe. His actions showed that he sought more than conquest. He sought legitimacy as the new ruler of Persia. 2 years later, in 331 BC, the decisive confrontation came at Gaugamela, near modern-day Iraq. Darius assembled an enormous army, perhaps 2 or 3 times larger than Alexander's. The battlefield was prepared in advance to favor Persian war chariots and cavalry. Yet Alexander's genius in strategy prevailed. He feigned weakness on his right flank, luring Persian forces out of position, then struck at the center with devastating force. Once again, Alexander charged directly at Darius, and once again the Persian king fled. The victory at Gaugamela shattered Persian power. Babylon, Susa, and the great capital of Persepolis fell into Alexander's hands. At Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Persia, Alexander allowed his men to plunder its treasures. According to tradition, the palace was later set ablaze. Whether by accident, drunken revelry, or Alexander's deliberate choice to avenge Greece for Persia's burning of Athens long ago, none can say. But the flames symbolize the fall of an empire. By the age of 25, Alexander had done the impossible. The Persian Empire, which had once stretched across continents, was his. He was not merely king of Macedon or hegemon of Greece. He was now lord of Asia. But conquest was not enough for him. For Alexander, the world still stretched further east, and his ambition drove him toward Egypt, India, and beyond. After the fall of Persia's capitals, Alexander's path led him to the ancient land of Egypt, a kingdom that had endured for millennia under pharaohs, priests, and gods. To the Egyptians, Persia had been a foreign oppressor, and when Alexander marched into the Nile Valley in 332 BC, he was not seen as a conqueror, but as a liberator. The gates of Egypt opened to him without resistance. The priests of Memphis proclaimed him Pharaoh of Egypt, successor to a divine line of rulers stretching back thousands of years. He performed the sacred rituals of the land, offering sacrifices to the Egyptian gods and presenting himself as their chosen king. To the Egyptians, he was not merely a foreign general. He was a rightful pharaoh, blessed by the divine order of the universe. Yet Alexander's ambitions in Egypt went beyond ceremony. He saw the land as a perfect place to realize a vision, the blending of cultures, the creation of new cities that would unite East and West. On the Mediterranean coast, near the mouth of the Nile, he ordered the foundation of a city that would bear his name, Alexandria. Alexandria was not just another city. Alexander imagined it as a beacon of learning, commerce, and culture. It was designed with broad streets, harbors for ships, and a plan that would later include the great library and the Pharos Lighthouse, one of the wonders of the ancient world. Though Alexander would never live to see it completed, Alexandria became the jewel of Hellenistic civilization, a bridge between Greece and Egypt, and a symbol of his vision of a unified world. But Alexander's stay in Egypt held one more extraordinary chapter. Driven by both faith and ambition, he made a journey into the Siwa oasis, deep in the Libyan desert. There stood the famous oracle of Ammon, a shrine of the Egyptian god, whom the Greeks identified with Zeus. Few had ever braved the perilous sands to reach it. Alexander did. The priests received him in secrecy, and though their exact words remain lost to history, legend holds that they greeted him as the son of Zeus Ammon. To his soldiers and subjects, Alexander was already larger than life. Now, with divine recognition, he was more than a king. He was a god in the making. Whether or not Alexander truly believed this himself, he never denied it. The aura of divinity gave him an authority no rival could challenge. In Egypt, Alexander's character revealed itself more clearly. He was not content to conquer lands. He wanted to shape them. He respected Egyptian traditions while infusing them with Greek influence. He sought to merge the worlds he ruled, creating not an empire of oppression, but a fusion. By 331 BC, Alexander left Egypt behind. Crowned as pharaoh, hailed as a god, and the founder of cities that would outlive him by centuries, His gaze turned once more eastward, toward the Persian heartland still loyal to Darius, and beyond them, to the edge of the known world. The young conqueror had taken the mantle of pharaohs, left behind the seeds of immortality in Alexandria, and emerged not only as a ruler of nations, but as a figure straddling the line between mortal and divine. Yet even this was not enough. His hunger for conquest and for eternal glory would drive him ever further. By 327 BC, Alexander's empire stretched from Greece to Babylon, from the deserts of Egypt to the mountains of Persia. But for the young king, this was not the end. His ambition burned brighter than ever. Beyond the Persian world lay the fabled lands of India, a realm of wealth, elephants, and mysterious kingdoms. To Alexander, conquering India meant pushing the boundaries of the known world itself. He gathered his battle-hardened army and marched east. The journey was brutal. His men crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains, icy peaks where thin air and freezing winds tested their endurance. Many perished along the way. But Alexander pressed forward, driven by a vision of reaching lands no Greek had seen before. In the Punjab, Alexander encountered one of his greatest challenges. King Porus, ruler of a mighty kingdom along the Hydaspes River. Porus was no ordinary foe. Towering in stature, a fierce warrior, and commanding an army that included fearsome war elephants, he stood as the embodiment of Indian power. The two armies clashed in 326 BC at the Battle of the Hydaspes. The river was swollen from monsoon rains, but Alexander used cunning. Under cover of night, he led a portion of his troops across the river in secret, surprising Porus at dawn. The battle was savage. The elephants charged, trampling men and horses, their tusks striking down Macedonian soldiers. But Alexander's discipline and strategy prevailed. His cavalry outmaneuvered Porus, and after hours of desperate struggle, the Indian king was surrounded. When Porus was brought before Alexander, bloodied but unbowed, the conqueror asked how he wished to be treated. Porus replied with a single word, "Like a king." Admiring his courage, Alexander restored him to power as a vassal ruler. It was a rare gesture of respect that revealed Alexander's ability not just to defeat enemies, but to win their loyalty. After Hydaspes, Alexander pressed further east. His men, however, grew weary. Years of endless campaigning, harsh marches, and distant lands had drained their spirits. At the banks of the Hyphasis River, the modern Bias, they refused to go on. Beyond lay vast kingdoms even greater in size, and the soldiers, longing for home, would march no further. For the first time, Alexander faced a limit not of armies or kings, but of his own men. Furious yet pragmatic, he relented. He ordered the construction of great altars on the riverbank, marking the farthest point of his eastern conquest. Here, he declared, was the edge of the world his empire would reach. The return journey was no easier. Alexander led part of his army down the treacherous Indus River, fighting fierce tribes and suffering heavy losses. Then, in one of the most grueling marches in history, he led his men across the Gadrosian Desert, a wasteland of scorching heat and endless dunes. Thousands perished from thirst and exhaustion, yet Alexander endured the same hardships as his men, sharing their suffering, which only deepened their loyalty. By the time he returned to Babylon, his conquests had carried him farther than any Greek or Persian king before him. He had carved an empire that stretched across 3 continents. Yet Alexander's march had also revealed the limits of human endurance. Though he had dreamed of conquering the entire world, his soldiers, and perhaps destiny itself, had drawn the line. Still, Alexander returned from India not as a mere conqueror, but as a legend. His victories had carried Greek culture to the ends of the known world, and his name had become immortal. But his story was not yet finished. In Babylon, fate awaited him with one final act. In 323 BC, after more than a decade of conquest, Alexander returned to Babylon, the glittering city of Mesopotamia that had become the capital of his vast empire. He was only 32 years old, yet he ruled more territory than any king in history, an empire stretching from Greece to Egypt, from Persia to India. The world lay beneath his feet, but Alexander's restless ambition had not dimmed. He dreamed of new campaigns, marches into Arabia, perhaps even westward into Carthage and Rome. His appetite for glory was endless. Yet in Babylon, the conqueror's fate would take a darker turn. His body, pushed to its limits by years of campaigning, wounds, and exhaustion, began to falter. Ancient sources tell of a banquet where Alexander drank deeply, celebrating with his companions. Soon after, he was struck by a sudden fever. Over the course of days, his strength drained away. Some whisper of poison, others of disease, perhaps malaria or typhoid. Whatever the cause, the invincible Alexander, who had faced countless dangers on the battlefield, was brought low by an unseen enemy. As the fever worsened, his generals gathered at his bedside. They asked to whom he would leave his vast empire. Alexander, unable to speak, is said to have gestured that his empire should go to the strongest. With those words, or perhaps silence interpreted as such, he left behind no clear heir. On the 10th or 11th of June, 323 BC, Alexander the Great breathed his last. He was just 32 years old. News of his death spread like shock waves through the empire. Soldiers wept openly, unwilling to believe that their leader, who had seemed more god than man, was gone. His body was said to remain lifelike for days without decay, fueling belief that he truly was divine. But with no successor, his empire quickly unraveled. His generals, the Diadochi, carved it into pieces, each claiming part of his legacy. Macedon, Egypt, and Asia were ruled separately, and the dream of a united empire vanished. Yet Alexander's influence did not die with him. His conquest had unleashed a new age, the Hellenistic era. Greek culture spread across Asia and Africa, blending with local traditions to create a vibrant fusion of art, science, and philosophy. Cities he founded, above all Alexandria and Egypt, became centers of learning and trade. For centuries, his name inspired kings, generals, and dreamers. From Julius Caesar to Napoleon, leaders looked to Alexander as the model of greatness. Legends grew around him. To some, he was a god. To others, a hero like Achilles reborn. His image appeared on coins, his stories told in markets and temples. In every corner of his empire, people remember the young king who had crossed continents, defeated empires, and dared to push beyond the horizon of the known world. Alexander's life was brief, but in those 32 years, he achieved what few could dream. He was a warrior, a visionary, and a figure larger than history itself. Though his empire crumbled, his legacy endured. He was not merely Alexander of Macedon. He was Alexander the Great, a name that echoes across time, a conqueror whose shadow still stretches over the world today.